Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call it when you're releasing a video game episodically, or you're known for that, and then you have to lay off some staff, and maybe your ambitions get smaller?
I don't know. What do you call it?
The contraction. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
It's like an antonym joke. I'm your antonym joke making host, Madelyn.
I'm your. I don't know if that's quite an antonym to Expanse host, Emma.
And thank you for tuning into the show. Emma is so right. I couldn't find a good actual answer. Is there an antonym to Expanse? Like, small stuff.
Small area.
Not much. Narrow
Compact
view.
zone. I thought for sure you were going to do something Odyssey related.
I couldn't think of a way to do, like, I was like, Etrian. I couldn't figure out, like a way to, like, sound out other words from Etrian. So that killed it for me. But yes, this week we're talking about Etrian Odyssey and The Expanse.
Yes, a Telltale game. Before you're like...
Expanse, the Telltale game.
Yeah, we are not expanding into book and TV show discussions. We were talking about
that's why you said that. I was like, is there another game called The Expanse? But no, you were just like, we're not talking about the books.
I didn't know if The Expanse had other video games, basically. So.
Okay, fair enough. But we're not there. We have to contract our attention here. I'm gonna keep trying to make that happen so people buy that it was an antonym. If I keep saying it, right?
Sure.
But we're starting with Etrian Odyssey, which is a 2007 3D dungeon crawler from Atlas for the Nintendo DS.
Etrian Odyssey is sort of one of Atlas's, I guess, lower profile projects.
Yeah.
But a whole bunch of them were released on the DS systems, and the first three just got a new release on Switch pretty recently. So still a very alive series. It's just a bit more of a niche, genre, because it's very focused on the dungeon crawling aspect of the game, since the main sort of appeal and draw of Etrian Odyssey is I'm so funny. Is that you draw?
That's pretty good.
Is that you draw your own maps as you make your way through the labyrinth.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me. Like, I was sort of flipping through. I tend to, like, kind of click through all the sequel games just to see if there's anything like, and at this point, the entire staff set the building on fire kind of stories to bring to the podcast. And it was interesting to me that for the first three, it's just like, there is no story. It's just
that's not fair.
You're right. Sorry. Compared to pull an RPG out of the hat and put it on the spectrum, and these are very close to the no story side.
3 even has multiple endings, so there is some story going on.
Okay, what I meant was the story could easily be summed up in a paragraph, which is feels like not often the case with these kind of expansive RPGs.
Sure.
And then when I got to 4 and 5, it was like, oh, okay, at the very least someone in writing these plot summaries has gone into a little more detail than let me give you the broad beats.
Yeah, there's also the first Untold is a remake of the first one, sort of.
That's right.
Loosely. But there's also like 2 Etrian Odyssey Untold games. I think there's just 2 that have like a specific story mode with pre-made characters and stuff like that. Because usually in the main series, you have like a set party of like 5 adventurers, I think. But you pick their classes and like there's like a few different illustrations to pick from, and you name them. So like they're your party, but you've created all of them yourself.
Yeah, no support conversations to be had here. Go back to your soft Fire Emblems.
It's not at all like Fire Emblem.
I know it's not at all like Fire Emblem.
In any way.
No party banter to be had here.
I just mean it's not a strategy game.
I know that, and I wasn't trying to say that. I was saying, like, don't come here for your, like, buddies talking to each other as they run around.
Sure.
It also has some Mystery Dungeon spinoffs. What
Yes.
is Mystery Dungeon? Who controls Mystery Dungeon? How does everything have a Mystery Dungeon spinoff?
It's called a collaboration, Madelyn.
I don't know.
The Persona Q games, I think, are also Etrian Odyssey alikes.
So to jump a little more into the game, as Emma said, yeah, you build your party, and then the main meat of the game, the main draw of the game, to recycle her joke, is basically the plot of these games pretty much always is there's some kind of treasure or goal or reason for which adventurers are heading into the Yggdrasil. I can never know how to pronounce this. It's Yggdrasil, right? Or Yggdrasil?
Yggdrasil, I think.
Yggdrasil. So there's always this dungeon called the Yggdrasil Labyrinth, right? Yggdrasil being the world tree from Norse mythology. And I feel like it's a lot of play in RPGs. I can't point to actual examples, but I read it and I was like, another one? It's a dope name, so that helps.
Yeah.
But you have, in any of these games, for some reason, there's adventurers are wanting to get to some point in this labyrinth, and so you pull your party together and you say, we can do it. Heck yeah, we can do it. And so all of these, with the exception of the Switch remaster, have been released for Nintendo DS or 3DS systems, which means they are very much created with that system in mind.
Yes. Usually on the top screen, you'll have like your 3D view of the labyrinth that you're going through. So you can see the environment, or you might get into combat with a monster, and then that will take up the top screen. Whereas the bottom screen shows your map of the floor of the dungeon that you're on, which I believe in the original release, like, it will fill in the squares for you as you go, but you have to use the stylus to essentially mark any, like, points of interest that you want to return to, or whatever else.
There's no waypoints to be had here.
Yes, the Switch version has more robust auto mapping features to sort of, like, you can still use the touchscreen in that. They essentially just have it side by side on the Switch release, as opposed to top and bottom. So it's also on PC, actually. But so you can either use the mouse, or you can use the touchscreen on the Switch, or you can try to use the controller controls to mark up the map yourself. Or
Emphasis
they've given
on try. Every review I read was like, I could not make this work.
It's a hard thing to transfer, but there also are more robust auto mapping features to sort of fill in for the lacking functionality for making the transfer.
Yeah, IGN did do an interview with the dev team for the recent remakes, and yeah, it sounds like transferring over the touchscreen capabilities at all was really hard. I didn't even think about the difference of, okay, with the Nintendo DS, we can assume that the player has a stylus, which is this really hard, really tiny point. But if I'm planning touchscreen controls on the Switch, I can't assume that. I have to make it, like, for the finger, basically, which is just an entirely different ball game, which is just not something that I think about.
It was really interesting. There's like these archived versions of some director's diaries from Kazuya Nino, who was the director of the first Etrian Odyssey and Trauma Center, I think, and then left Atlas after that. But there was one of his whole entries was like on the DS stylus and his feelings on the stylus.
Makes total sense, but it's funny when you say it that way.
Yeah, because he says, like, as a player, like, I don't really like using the stylus, but I think games that make use of the stylus are cool at the same time. Because if you're using the stylus, you can't play it lying down, specifically. And it's tiring to hold the system in one hand and then use the stylus. And also, like, your hand covers the screen is another thing that he doesn't like, usually about the stylus. But he uses, like, Trauma Center as an example, like, it's to make it feel like surgery. You wouldn't want the player to be lying on their back playing on their DS anyway. So, like, the stylus makes sense because you're, like, sitting at your desk, putting your effort into it to sort of represent stylus. So, for Etrian Odyssey, apparently the design they thought about was, like, you have, like, study mode, I think he called it, study style and relaxed style, where sometimes, like, you're going through exploring a new thing of map and you have your stylus out and you're making marks and drinking coffee and sitting at your desk playing. And then when you're done with that map section and you're sort of wandering around or going back through a previous floor that you've gone to, you put the stylus back in and you just sort of chill in bed or while traveling or whatever. So they're thinking of, like, using the two different styles of modes based on whether you actually need the stylus or not. Which,
fascinating.
A lot of thought going into the use of the stylus. Boy, I miss the DS.
I knew this was going to be an Emma misses the DS.
I just, as I was talking about it, I was like, oh, I miss the DS.
If the Switch 2 folds, you're going to lose your mind.
I am. That is, like, I mean, the Switch is also too heavy, but I'm not thinking we're ever going to get something like the size of the DS again. But if it folds, that does fix one of my major problems with the Switch, which is that I have to put it in a case to carry it around well.
That's such a weird hang-up, I have to say.
Well, I can't just, like, slip it in and out of my backpack. I have to, like, get the case out and put it in and close it up and then put it in my backpack, you know? It's not really pick up and play in the same way as a DS.
Sure.
And I can't leave it on, really, right?
Okay, that's true. I won't.
If I just have to quick
you can
put away
to
my DS, I can just close the DS and put it away, and it's not going to do anything to the game in there. So that's all I'm saying.
So I almost called it Yggdrasil Labyrinth. That's not the name. Although I think that was a potential name that they were going to use internationally, but they were scared of it getting confused with another Atlas game that was Yggdra Union. Which, you can't... There's no way in the West you could have released 2 Yggdra games.
No.
We could not handle that. They were right. But it's very difficult.
Yes.
What it's known for. Particularly... so, by the way, remember when we all roasted me for saying, like, oh, you're gonna traverse everything and it's kind of turn-based? Remember when that was a roast? That's kind of what Etrian Odyssey does.
It's not an open world game, though, Madelyn.
Okay, I know.
The problem was that you were trying to do that in an open world game. The point of Etrian Odyssey is that there's floors that you go through.
Yeah. All right, whatever. I was trying to salvage my reputation, and instead... as you're moving around, each square you move, like, advances the clock a certain amount, basically, or your battle turns advance the clock a certain amount. Mm-hmm. And so also on the map, there are FOEs, which I saw multiple different takes on what that acronym stands for.
I wonder if they're localized differently in different games.
So... in, I think, Wikipedia, maybe not, though, some review said they were field-on enemies, which is kind of dumb. Obviously, we're going for foe as the acronym, so some compromises had to be made. But then somebody else said it was formido oppugnatura exequens. Like Latin.
I wonder if it's different for different games.
That's really different.
Well, if the setting's different, I guess.
Fair enough. Anyway, regardless, these foes are like mini-bosses who also kind of move around the dungeon on a turn-based system in line with yours. And so you can run into them. And then they kill you.
Well, ideally they don't, but yeah.
Ideally they don't.
Yeah. When you die, I think it's basically like you keep your map data even when you hit a game over. So ideally you get to know the floor better and are able to sort of navigate it better to avoid anything that might kill you immediately. And then you get stronger as you go further down into the labyrinth. One of the other director's diaries was just talking about why they made it a dungeon RPG, and like he was just saying like I think it's exciting when like you know when you'll run into something, right?
Yeah.
Like you used Dragon Quest as an example where there's like a point where it's like walk 4 steps from this area to find something, and like there's excitement of like getting into position, and then you're like 1 step, 2 step, I got it, you know.
Yeah.
And so he finds it more interesting where it's like instead of like at the center of a walkway on the 5th space of a 10 space walkway, you find an enemy is something that appealed more to him apparently, which is I think is very funny. I will give you this. I did say like it's not a strategy game, Madelyn, and it's not, but because you're moving at the same rate as other enemies and because you learn more about each floor as you go, it is a sort of like a strategic thing of where you're moving in the dungeon. It's not a strategy game, but you're using strategic elements to like be like, okay, so this is the way that we're going to go to get to where we want to go, and we'll be able to prepare for any situation that we run into.
Using your brain, some might say.
Sure.
So Etrian Odyssey feels like the kind of series that should be like, oh, there were 2 of these in the early aughts, and then it didn't make the jump to the 3DS, so they didn't make it again. But as Emma said earlier, they've had like relatively consistent, or they did anyway, have relatively consistent release schedule for about 10 years. In that 5 of them came out between 2007 and 2016, plus a bunch of Mystery Dungeon stuff, plus they remade the first 2 games. And it's really only, I mean, since the fall of the DS, they've not attempted to make a new one yet, although the team seems interested. And obviously now we have these remakes.
Yeah. I do think it's just like a challenge of like clearly even with porting them onto the Switch, they're still trying to figure out how to do them on the Switch.
Yeah.
And I think that is a big challenge for a game that's very much feels like it's like you need your dual screens. It makes so much sense on dual screens.
Yeah. Really what they need to do is just embrace the you have to have a notebook with you, Elden Ring gamers, and just say, sorry, the map is, you have to draw it. There's no option to do a map.
Yeah, you could
like,
make it
game comes with
even more intense, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's already, right? Like, Etrian Odyssey is so interesting because, I mean, as we were talking about in our RPG podcast, I feel like these kinds of RPG games, even ones that come from more traditional beginnings, are all moving more toward like, okay, there's gonna be more plot, there's gonna be more character banter, there's gonna be more things to soften this a little bit and welcome players who haven't played this genre before. And not that Etrian Odyssey hasn't done any of that softening over time, but it is a much more hardcore take on a like very old school RPG inspired gameplay method.
Yeah.
That it's, yeah, for like very specific type of RPG fan.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer because if you would let my characters like chit chat with each other a little bit, I think this could be a game that I would enjoy.
Well, then maybe you should check out the Untold games, which unfortunately are probably not actually available anywhere now.
Yeah, I'll check them out.
You know, they're 3DS games. They're probably not awfully expensive yet on Amazon, but
I would have to own a 3DS though.
Yeah, that's true. That is I own a 3DS, but
I know you do, but I do not. I will talk a little bit about the plot of the first game, because there's like, it's like it is funky, despite the fact that I'm sure you spend 95% of your time with like none of this being especially relevant to walking around beating up monsters, drawing your map. I was shocked by the twist, a bold twist at the end. So you're going into this labyrinth that's infested with forest folk who do not like that you are in the labyrinth, right? And that's most of the game. You're fighting through. You're this like treasure hunting party, and then once you've like beaten through the boss, you get to the root of the tree. I don't think it's actually a tree, but whatever, the bottom of the labyrinth, and it's post-apocalyptic Shinjuku. You're in Earth the whole time.
Atlas really likes this story beat.
Well, see, here's the thing. If this game had come out a little later, it probably would have been post-apocalyptic Shibuya. But as we know,
you see,
Shibuya
I
was
think
not
that is
invented.
what it is in SMT4. So, you're right.
Yeah.
I think it's all of Tokyo in SMT4, but I think you come down in Shibuya. So they really like this plot idea.
It's a good plot. It hits.
You know what it is? It is
I was
good.
like, dang, that hits.
I love it when a new civilization is built on top of the bones of the old one. It's good. I like it.
Do you think that how much of that do you think comes from like Planet of the Apes for people? How much of these like reveal at the end it was Earth all along comes from that, reveal shot of the Statue of Liberty?
I mean, probably a good number. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people saw that film. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big film.
Is that a popular film?
I think it was a popular film, yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. I was like, where does, like, if I went back to ancient Greece, if I did the Odyssey and I talked to Homer, like, would he be like, oh yeah, no, like, here is also my story about post-apocalyptic Greece. Like, look, you reveal, it was the Acropolis the whole time. How long have we been being like, shock! He was here the whole time.
I don't know.
I will have to research. I'm curious about that now. I'm like, how far back does
post-apocalyptic
like our
stories
sci-fi
go.
obsession?
Yeah.
I also like that after you do that, so people try to kill you because they don't want to lose the tourism revenue of having like an adventuring spot. And if you've like found the secret, no one will adventure anymore. More games should do that.
It's smart.
Ultimately, though, at the end, you kill someone who seems to have been, like, trying to save the planet? Maybe? Maybe they became evil. This, I'm sure, would be clearer in the game. But you killed someone, and I was like, I don't know, that seems bad? Maybe you were the evil one all along.
Who knows?
Speaking of, the future, I guess.
Yeah.
The Expanse. A Telltale Series.
Expanse, a Telltale Series. Sort of.
Someone
It
was just
sure
talking
is
to me
branded.
about The Expanse to me last night. Brought up The Expanse. And I was like, my sister read those books.
I sure do. Yeah, I've read 4 of the books. And watched 5 seasons of the TV show. Yeah, so it's branded as a Telltale series. But I find a lot of people don't actually know what happened with Telltale. So the Telltale that's operating now has some of the same developers, but a lot of new people as well. It is not the Telltale that shut down. It's another company, LC Entertainment, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
LCG Entertainment just sort of bought the brand and sort of the intellectual property rights and game licenses from Telltale, and is mostly working as like a publishing sort of unit, as the Expanse of Telltale series was actually developed by primarily Deck 9, who also made Life is Strange True Colors.
Yep.
So a Telltale series is more a statement about like the type of game they're trying to make rather than being like it's from like the original Telltale company. Because I still see a lot of people who seem to think that it's like the same entity, even though it's very much not the same entity.
Well, the staffing overlap makes it confusing, right? They hired back everyone that Immortals of Avium hadn't already snapped up.
Right, but even then they're sort of functioning as a publishing, more of a publishing thing than the developer of the games they're working on. I think the only other game they've announced so far is The Wolf Among Us 2, and that's also being developed with another team. So, yeah. Anyway,
Well,
this
good,
is the
'cause it
first.
seems like no one really works there anymore.
At what, Telltale?
Well, I'll get that. They laid off a bunch of people after The Expanse.
Was that after The Expanse? I thought Telltale had done their layoffs like a while ago, and it became public after The Expanse, and then Deck 9 just recently laid off a bunch of people also.
Maybe the things I was reading weren't 100% clear, but what I read was that a bunch of people got laid off a few weeks after The Expanse finished.
I remember that people got laid off from Telltale, although the news of that was like significantly after layoffs had actually happened, is what I remember. And then Deck 9 did lay people off. But you know what? There's been thousands of layoffs, so maybe Telltale did too. And I just am remembering a different one. Yeah. Yay! I love the games industry. But anyway, this was like their first release of a new like Telltale game post Telltale closure, right? Because Skybound handled the last few episodes of the last Walking Dead series.
Right.
So this is like the return of Telltale, essentially, which it didn't get very much hype or much anything when it came out.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Well, it's tricky because I'm sure because one of the things that is interesting or exciting for fans perhaps about this series is that it, like many of the actors from the show, reprise their roles. But this came out during the strike. So I imagine even if during the writer's strike at least, and also partially during the actor's strike. And so I'm sure that those people couldn't promote it.
Yeah. Or
they could, but like, it's a weird situation of even if you're promoting the game, you're also kind of promoting the show, and you're not really supposed to promote the show.
Yeah.
So it's funky.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember Kara G doing some stuff, but I don't remember the timing of it at all. But yeah, so the Expanse is sort of, building off of Telltale's legacy of creating new stories and existing IPs. So this is a prequel to the television series. I thought it was interesting how a lot of the stuff was like talking about the books and the TV series and like being faithful. And it's super interesting because the TV series is not a very faithful adaptation to its benefit, I think, because it's made for TV. And so it's
a lot of book, so you gotta do something.
Yeah. But anyway, it takes a very popular sort of breakout character from the show, Comuna Drummer, who is in fact a composite character from the books. So there is a Comuna Drummer in the books, but the character as she is in the show is like made up of like 3 different characters and then expanded upon for the purposes of the show. So it's taking her from the show, who's a very popular character on the show, and giving her sort of like a prequel story. So it's super interesting to be like, there was like, I watched like an AMA with a couple of the Telltale guys being like, oh yeah, there's not like a novella about her in the way that there are about other Expanse characters. And I'm like, yeah, because she's not a character really in the books like this. Yeah. So it was interesting to see how they navigate like talking about like the books versus the TV show, and kind of seemed like they didn't really have a full understanding of like the differences between the two. But I don't know. That was it was just that's not like necessarily a critique, just like an interesting
though
thing that I noted. Yeah. But yeah, it's a prequel to the show with Kamina Drummer. And it's just sort of going through some of the stuff that happens to her before the point that you meet her in the show. Well, she's working as like a salvager, or a scavenger, really, in space. And they get into a tense situation regarding valuable cargo that they find.
As someone who doesn't have any familiarity with The Expanse at all, other than knowing it's a sci-fi series and the little bits that I've heard from Emma, I do have to kindly request that all the people reviewing this stop like interchangeably using the actors' names and the characters' names. It took me a very long time, an embarrassingly long time, to determine if the lead character's hero's name was Kamina Drummer or if it was Kara G. And similarly with the character in the like bonus episode, I was like, because both of them have cool person names.
Yeah,
like, they all have equally kind of cool person names, and sometimes you can tell because it's like, oh, the character's name isn't like Jane Thompson. Like that's not the name of the ship XO. Sorry, it's not. But here, because they kept switching back and forth, I was like, what's her name? I can't tell.
So they released this sort of episode more consistently episodically than classic Telltale, right? Which were just sort of like, when it's finished,
comes out when it's done. No, it came out bi-weekly.
Yes, it came out every 2 weeks, and was, I assume, completed before they even released the first episode. But in some ways, I think that might have hurt it in terms of receiving like reviews, because I saw a lot of reviews for like the first episode or the first 3 episodes, and found like a single video review on like the last episode, because they're not spaced far enough that like it's like a new news item, right? When a new episode comes out. And so it seems like for a lot of outlets, they're just like, okay, we'll just do a review like sort of in the middle of it or at the beginning of it, and then that's all the sort of that's all we'll do for this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, right? I think for everyone involved, reviewing something that releases episodically like this is tough and weird, because it's on one hand, you want to be able to give a like actual good review, right? And reviewing the first 1 or 2 installments is really more of a preview than, at least compared to like what reviews look like for a more typical game release. But the ideal situation would be like TV. Well, I mean, I guess in TV you get like parts, you get episodes from throughout, and you perhaps don't get all of them.
Yeah.
But I sort of feel like the ideal situation, especially if the game theoretically was finished or close to by the time of the first episode release, is, man, you've got to, like, the ideal way is to get the reviewer like the actual full game so they can actually review it, and then it comes out. But of course, that's a tall order in game development, isn't it?
Yeah. The Expanse is also quite short compared to a classic Telltale release. So across all of its episodes, it's about 4 to 5 hours long. Maybe a little more if you're taking your time. Short. Yeah, it is quite short. I was also surprised by this. I was like, the first episode is 4 hours long? No, all of it is like 4 to 5, maybe 6 hours long. When generally you look at...
That's crazy.
The first Walking Dead is like 8 to 10 hours long. The Wolf Among Us is like 7 to 8 hours long. So it is quite short in comparison to a lot of previous Telltale fare.
That's so, like, I can't imagine Tales from the Borderlands was less than 10.
I can check for you.
So I can't think of those things as lasting at least 2 hours. That's so fascinating because that is so... It's like releasing a 45-minute episode of television every 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And that is so out of touch with how we watch TV now. I realize we've moved away from like binge culture a lot over the time we've been recording Talk This, or moved to a different relationship with binge culture, perhaps. But only releasing like, here's a 45-minute episode 2 times a month seems really out of step with how we do even engage with stuff that is still coming out episodically.
Yeah, so How Long to Beat has completionist at like 8 hours. Okay. So maybe if you're doing everything, it's a little bit more expansive. But that's also weird to me that like I didn't even mean to do that. It is weird to me how like the main story versus completionist is like a 3.5 hour difference. It just must be something different with the structure of the game. But yeah, Tales from the Borderlands, it has completionist at like 11.5 hours versus main story at 10.5 hours.
Yeah. Well, in the Expanse, you've got anti-grav boots. So completionist if you want to like zoom around a little bit.
I guess so. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, on the shorter end of these sorts of games.
Which, you know, good for them. And plenty of the articles about this also mentioned that, you know, the studio was really anti-crunch culture in its new iteration, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, this game seems to have gotten, like, zero hype. And it's a weird choice, right? On one hand, it makes sort of sense, because The Expanse is one of those notable, like, it got canceled, and then people saved it, because it was loved so much kind of series, and definitely has a cult following. But it's an interesting choice to make a prequel that by all accounts requires you to have some familiarity with the show.
Yeah. It's definitely not an IP, like it is quite, I think it is quite popular among like people who still watch TV. You know?
Sure.
But that's a somewhat small contingent. It's definitely not an IP on the same level as like The Walking Dead or Batman or even stuff like you know, like The Wolf Among Us and Borderlands have like especially The Wolf Among Us actually benefits from being less well known, I think. Although I think the Fable series is popular. But Expanse falls like somewhere in between that, which I think is actually not it's the worst place to be when making like a licensed title.
Yeah, you're betting really hard on some kind of like it becoming a must play in a specific cult demographic.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
Yeah.
I don't really know. Somebody in management must really love The Expanse and you know, when you read about it, all this is just from me reading about it. I don't have any familiarity with the show. Like, it makes sense of they're making tough decisions all the time. And so,
I do think
it makes sense as a Telltale property in that sense.
Yeah, like, picking characters, it is sort of, like, interesting, and I don't know how well they pull this off, although they do talk about in interviews, like, it managing to feel authentic no matter, like, how you're playing this character, but Drummer and Avasarala, who's in the bonus episode, are both characters that, like, one of the difficulties in making choice-based games is making, like, decisions that are kind of mean, right?
Yeah.
As players don't really like picking those decisions. And sometimes they aren't fun to pick anyway. But picking characters like Drummer and Avasarala in the show, they do make various decisions that are both like admirable and cruel, right, at different points. So I do see the draw of having a pre-created character that it feels like they could make decisions that are either way. And the player being able to role play more comfortably in more dubious territory, perhaps.
That makes sense.
So I do see the draw there, and I think that it could be interesting in that sense. But I just don't know if this was the right place to start for them.
Yeah. Well, and also interesting to me that they chose to make a prequel.
Yeah.
Which on one hand could have been an interesting choice if it didn't rely on you to know too much about the TV show, but that does not seem to be the case. But, you know, the big Telltale selling point, the big controversial Telltale selling point sometimes perhaps is like, your choices matter. Like, you're going to get a different ending. And certainly there are opportunities for your choices to have impact throughout, as there always are. But it's particularly interesting to choose to make a prequel where it's like, well, I watched the TV show, so I know where she has to end up at the end.
Yeah. I think making a prequel is tricky, I guess, in general.
Yeah. Yep.
But the big critique I saw in like the episode 5 review that I watched, which I did not save the name, but I think if you search the Expanse episode 5 review on YouTube, you would find it as like the only one there.
Emma said there's exactly one, so
there was like exactly one, yeah. Is that like the 5th episode starts putting in like decisions that feel like they mean something, which apparently previous episodes really just hadn't been able to really sell most of the decisions and make it feel like there was like an intense pressure on them or that they were particularly interesting.
Well, that's good. And then maybe they succeeded. It struck me as interesting to be like, our first game
I just
back.
meant like, but it's kind of an indictment because of course you can make impactful things in the 5th episode.
Right.
Versus, you know, the other 4 perhaps.
It doesn't have to branch for 3 more.
Yeah.
From there.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, Telltale has done some layoffs again. Maybe it's unclear whether it was before this release or during this release or after this release, but they laid off a bunch of people. They laid off a bunch of people at the studio they just bought, right?
Yeah.
It's bad out there. I do want to shout out someone in I think it was Rock Paper Shotgun comments, who was basically like, they need to get themselves a Game Pass deal. And honestly, that seems to me to be the only way that this company finds a way to keep itself alive, is if they can get Microsoft to like.
Honestly, they should go to Netflix, maybe.
Oh, that's true.
They have a pre-existing. Well, the old company had a pre-existing relationship with Netflix for some of their games,
right?
And maybe that's another option. Of making
Do people play the Netflix games though? Is that real?
It's real. I don't know if people play them, but they just added something big recently. I don't remember what it was. Oxenfree's on there.
But see, I was thinking, and I guess Netflix is the same model, but I was thinking, Game Pass is a good model because the episodic nature of these releases actually serves both parties. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about like weird player attrition or anything quite so much. If you don't have to worry about like how much did 3 sell versus 1 if you're on Game Pass. But if you're on Game Pass, if you're Microsoft, it's like, well, I'll get someone to buy another month because the next thing is coming out.
Yeah.
I would be interested to see, like, are there more people releasing episodically through that? And is that something they're exploring? Because it feels like this is a model that has been really hard to make work independently. And, like, that's literally what a subscription service is for.
Yeah. They are doing...
Whether that's Netflix, whether that's Game Pass, whatever.
Yeah. I think something new, this is like an example of this, because I don't think they usually offer, like, DLC through Game Pass. But they are for Persona 3 Reload, the episode Aegis expansion that they just announced will be available through Game Pass. So maybe they're experimenting a little bit with like putting expansions of games on there as well.
Well, it's a real shame that the Telltale, like, it's just a shame that they can't find a way for this to make money. Because it's a cool thing, and it feels like something that people want for properties that they care about. It's like, let me spend more time with these characters.
Yeah.
And it's just a shame that they, like, can't seem to make a profit doing that.
Yeah, it's rough, I think, making games for an established IP.
Yeah.
In various ways. In some ways, I imagine it's fun, but in a lot of ways, I imagine it's rough to really balance it. Well, is it time to mash these up?
It might be. It might be mashing time. So it's
Etrian
hard
Odyssey,
to mash
a Telltale Series.
It's so actually I hadn't thought about this until just this moment that these games are in many ways like they are opposite from each other. Right? Etrian Odyssey is like I am not interested in these characters talking to each other. Right? They are not specific characters based on anything. They are your healer and your fighter and your wizard. Right? That's what they are. As opposed to the Expanse, which is
Alchemist,
like these are very specific. Sorry,
Alchemist,
go ahead.
Dark Hunter, Landsnecht, Survivalist, Troubadour, Medic, Ronin, Hexer, Protector. Okay? There's no fighter or healer. Please.
Whatever. Fight me. The Landsnecht is probably a fighter. I just don't know how to say that. I'm the fighter. Fight me.
Okay.
Whatever. My point being that the Expanse, by being based on a licensed game or licensed series, licensed property, and also by being basically about like here are some very specific people and like this ragtag crew. There's a ragtag crew in both of them, but in one it's very fleshed out, and in one it's Ronin, Landsknecht, whatever the heck else you said.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Well, I was going to say, okay, like, you know, can I take... It feels wrong unless I'm going to do, like, okay, sorry. I started 17 sentences there. Two ways we might go. One is there a way to bring the conversation system into something with a map? Or, like, the Telltale Choice system into something that also involves map making. The other way, and probably the easier way, is to build something that's map-makey that is sci-fi-y.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely something interesting about, like, map making, but you're in space, right? Like, how do you do that? What does that look like? I see something interesting there. I also think there's something interesting of, like, having, like, a sort of narrative choice-based... I think this would end up kind of being survival horror-y of, like, navigating a labyrinth of some sort, right? And like having to like balance your party and like have their morale and choosing the directions that you're going and what that affects different members of your party or whatever. So I think both of those do actually have some level of potential there.
Yeah, there's something commercial in very different ways about both of those for sure. Actually, I take that back. The Dungeon Navigator choice-based one seems like it could be commercial. Feels like it scratches that roguelike. It's not a roguelike, right? But roguelikes are hip, right? And it's like, oh, you're making choices with your party. And it's actually a narrative game. It's not a roguelike, but maybe it feels like Hades a little bit. You know? I could see how that could be marketed. The Space Explorer mapping game would have to be for the hardcore Among Us.
Sure. Among Us? Among Us space mapping game? Collab?
Maybe that's the licensed property for it. Yeah. Hard-boiled, taking it very seriously. Among Us, guys.
But, you know, I feel like setting in space, the game industry loves space right now. We've been in space for like 5 years or something. So, you know, maybe we could get funded off that. It's in space.
You're right.
Here you go. Here's your money.
That is how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, it would be like, it wouldn't be like Outer Wilds, but I feel like it could, it's like for some of those players, the idea of like, I'm in space and I'm like charting a map feels similar to that game.
Absolutely, yeah. I think so.
But what's the story, Emma? What's it about? Why am I charting a map?
To
what end?
Well, sort of in an expansion sort of story element. Perhaps there's some sort of singularity or mysterious structure or strange happening in space that like all of these competing factions have sort of gathered around, and you're chosen as like an expeditionary team for one of these factions, and so you're going into this mysterious structure, right, in space, and sort of spacing it out, perhaps you might say.
Yeah, there
Space
you go.
in the joint.
Okay. I can buy that. Yeah, I just want to avoid, as like, there's definitely like a colonial, like space colonizer way we could go with mapping. But I was like, maybe not that.
Sure, yeah. And so you're doing a little bit of that in Etrian Odyssey. You do say, frick you, forest folks. Who cares about your ancient past?
That is true. But I don't want to take that part.
Sure,
that I
sure.
will leave. There also won't be any QuickTime events. We'll leave that with the Expanse.
That's fine too. Yeah.
You know, pick and choose. Take the best.
Yeah.
Not gonna mark those on my map. For what system is this released? Are we just releasing this on the 3DS?
Yeah, just on the 3DS. Mysteriously.
Does it come with? Can I make it that you purchase the game and it comes with a little note, like a map, like it comes with a paper map?
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Actually, there would be something interesting and like this is interesting. To be like, there's a game. People would hate this, right? But whatever. Bear with me. There's a game. I know something has done this before, and there's like an app, right? And so you get the game and you download the app, and the map is on your phone,
like the Wii U.
Like the Wii U, which
with your phone
was a notable success.
Yeah,
for Nintendo.
Everybody loved the Wii U.
But that would solve the like having the map on screen thing is so clunky. It's like, okay, if you can just get another screen, then yeah. Well, that mashed better than I expected. I expected these to not mash well at all, and you came with some good stuff. Nice.
They were off your ideas first, you know.
Yeah, but I had no idea how to turn them into anything. I was like, I'm gonna just draw space. My game is draw space. Well, listeners, on that note, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Would you play our space coloring book game? Have you engaged with The Expanse as a video game, as a TV show, as a book? And do you have thoughts about how those three things engage with each other? Have you played Etrian Odyssey? And have you just gotten absolutely bodied by the foes? Does it scratch that old school RPG itch? If you have thoughts on any of this or anything else we talked about this week, you should hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But perhaps most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts. I think I might have said some things that are defunct because my brain stopped working. But we're on any podcast service that works. So get the podcast there. Subscribe to Talk This. Next week is PAX recap, right?
Yeah.
I wonder what happens then, after that. Probably a Madelyn side quest.
Yeah.
Yeah, should not try to turn it into 8 weeks of gaming by mistake. PAX's recap, where Emma talks about nothing but the Shadow of the Damned remaster.
Yeah, that'll be, they announced that. Well, actually, they announced that a few weeks ago. that'll be at PAX's.
Last week.
We played it already.
Yeah, that's a preview. I guess we've played it.
We probably played it.
We probably did. So look forward to our hot takes on PAX East. Place your bets now on how many refills of Wild Bills we got.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that like my PAX thing? But it is.
No, it's funny.
It's really funny. Wild Bills is really funny. So, you know, if you want to, we've already been, but if you want to contribute to the Wild Bills Fund, just let us know. Anyway, listeners, that's it for this week's show. Emma, do you have a sign off?
We haven't picked the games yet.
You're so right. I'm done. I'm out of here. That's not it for this week's show. I was like, next week's PAX, and then it's my, it's so far away. It's 3 weeks away. Pick the games out of the hat.
In 3 weeks, for our old game, we'll be talking about Clock Tower. And for our new game, we'll be talking about Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora.
Man, big season for licensed games for us.
Loving it.
Licensed sci-fi.
And now, I guess I will sign us off.
Thank you,
this
Emma.
week, I hope that you neither are lost in space nor lost in underground labyrinth.